Good. Are you all doing okay? Good. I may not preach the sermon you expect from this passage. But just as I was listening to the reading, there's so many things you could say about that passage, actually, aren't there? It's just brilliant and beautifully read. Thank you very much. So just to get you up to speed to where we're up to, we met Elijah 2 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And then last week, we would have heard about him at Mount Carmel, but actually, because the Queen died, we decided to do something different. So we'll come back to Mount Carmel a bit later. So just to fill in what's happened in between, Elijah, you have the drought, and then Elijah calls together these 450 prophets of Baal who are leading the people of Israel in worship that's abhorrent to God. And well, you know this story, don't you? I don't know why I'm telling you. You all know it. But anyway, Elijah says, let's set up a sacrifice thing, set up 2 altars. We'll sacrifice some cows, and whichever God answers with fire is the true God, or something like that. Do you remember? And there's a lovely line. Why is this the only line I'm telling you? But anyway, there's a lovely line about how Elijah at one point says, "What's your God doing? Is he busy?" And actually, he's saying, "Is he going to the toilet?" But that's in the Hebrew. We don't translate it into English all the time. But you didn't really need to know that. Anyway, the point is, Baal turns out to have nothing to give. There's nothing that happens. Whereas then Elijah, his God, comes and burns up the sacrifice, and it doesn't go well for the prophets as well. Okay, so that's what happens in chapter 18. So we've missed that bit. Oh yeah, and then at the end of that, then Elijah says, "Oh, go and have a look at the sky. There's a cloud the size of a man's hand," and then it gets bigger and bigger, and then the rain comes. So Elijah, having said that it's not going to rain again until he says, then speaks out the rain falling, the end of the drought as well. So then what we had at the beginning of the passage here is Jezebel, who is the queen consort, hears about what Elijah's done and that he's slaughtered all of these false prophets, and she's not happy. And she says, "That's it, I'm having revenge." And she sends a messenger. She says, "Send this messenger to Elijah to say, I'm going to do to you what you did to all of them." Okay, so that's the beginning of the chapter. And then you think, what is Elijah going to do next? Just imagine you hadn't heard the reading that you've just heard now. What would he do next? So he's had this, he's prophesied this drought as God's judgment on the people. They've had a long drought. He's been off to Zarephath, miracles over there. He's come back again. He's had this big face-off with the prophets of Baal and won. And then Jezebel, this queen, says, "I'm coming to get you." What is he going to do next? I would expect him to do a number of things. I would expect him maybe to, he sometimes called fire down on people, didn't he? It's not something I recommend, but he sometimes did that. He could have done that on Jezebel. Again, I'm not saying he should have done, but that might have been something in character. He could have called down fire on Jezebel at that point. He could have maybe had a little victory tour of the land of Israel, couldn't he? Look what I did to those Baal chaps, like when the football teams win and they come in the bus through town, like that, but an Old Testament version coming through, and look, I've done it. Or he could have gone round Israel and had a little revival. Do you know? Look, we've had this face-off against the prophets of Baal, and look how powerful your God is. Come back to him, return to him, come to him, and give your hearts to him. Learn to worship him properly. All of those kind of things. He could have had a revival campaign. So there's a number of things, eh? What does he actually do? Well, it seems to me really, really strange. I've always thought this story is really strange. That what Elijah does is he flees into the wilderness, and then he settles himself down under a tree, and then he says, "My life is too much," and he prays that God would take his life. He prays that he would die. And then an angel wakens him. There's a lovely thing in the passage there. Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, and it's the same Hebrew word for angel. Then God sends a messenger, an angel, to Elijah, and the angel brings him bread cooked over coals. That sounds lovely, doesn't it? And a jar of water. And actually the Hebrew word for jar there is a really obscure Hebrew word, but it's the same word for the jar of oil that we had in Zarephath. 2 weeks ago. It's a lovely little touch there as well. The angel comes and wakens Elijah and brings him, or has left him, this fresh bread and water, and he eats. And God comes to him and says, what are you doing? Or what are you doing here? And Elijah says, I've been really zealous for you, but your people have rejected you, and now they've all turned against me. They want to take my life. He says that twice. Do you remember? Did you notice? If exactly the same conversation. God says, what are you doing here? And Elijah gives the same speech. It's almost like it's a mantra. I've been very zealous, but they've rejected your covenant, and they've turned against me, and they're trying to take my life. And actually, that's not entirely true. And Elijah must know it's not entirely true. He knows there's others who haven't turned to Baal, who've stayed faithful to God. And then the second time God asks him the question, God gives him that answer. But Elijah, there's 17,000 who haven't bowed the knee to Baal, and they're still with you. So first of all, he flees. He wants to die. It feels like his sense of fear has been magnified. The volume's been turned up on his fear. Jezebel has made a valid threat against him, one that she never actually is able to fulfill. But she's threatened his life, and he's afraid. But it feels like that fear has become much more than it could be and that it should be. Do you know? And then secondly, something similar has happened with his loneliness, because he obviously does feel alone, but he's got into his head, there's nobody else with me, I'm the only one. But it's actually not true. So his fear's gone up in volume. His loneliness is growing too. And then God says to him, go to Horeb. And he goes there and he hides in a cave. Horeb might be another name for Sinai, the mountain where Moses met God and Moses received the 10 Commandments. Do you remember? And Elijah goes and hides in a cave, possibly the same cleft in the rock that Moses hid, and that God told Moses to hide from, so that that God could pass before Moses, and Moses could see his back. Do you remember that passage? There's some lovely Old Testament passages, aren't there? Anyway, Elijah goes and hides in this cave in the rock, and God says to him, come out, because I'm going to meet with you. And what does Elijah do? You have to read between the lines to see this, actually. But what he does is he stays in the cave. He comes out in the end, but after all of the fireworks and stuff, God says, come out, I want to meet with you. And Elijah stays there, which is odd. This prophet becomes a disobedient prophet. It's almost like the fear that we're talking about. The fear's frozen his heart, frozen his mind, and he can't even come out. And then there's all that stuff. There's the wind that shatters the rocks. There's the earthquake. There's the fire, which, if you know your Old Testament well, are the normal sorts of ways that God meets with people, aren't they? All those big dramatic things is normally a sign of God coming to meet with his people. And then there's what's sometimes translated as still small voice, or the sound of fine silence, the calm after the storm that comes. And finally that draws Elijah out of the cave, and he takes his, I think it said coat in the passage. I like mantle because it comes in useful later. His thing that he was wearing, he takes his mantle and he covers his face. And I think probably the writer of First Kings there is using that imagery of Elijah covering his face to show us that Elijah has now opened himself to God and does realize that God is there and is meeting with God. And then God speaks to him. God says, go back the way you came. And he gives him some simple instructions, which is another interesting thing in the story. It almost feels like there's all of this drama, and then God's like, go and anoint this chap over there and go and do that. It doesn't feel like almost a big enough list of instructions after all that's happened. Anyway, what did I think was out of character for Elijah? Well, I told you his fear seems bigger than it needs to be. His sense of being alone is out of perspective. Possibly you might even say he's becoming a little bit delusional. He's not got a good grasp of what's really going on. His outlook is certainly very, very bleak. He flees. He gives up on his life. He doesn't want to care for himself. He's not bothered about food and drink, and that's why the angel needs to bring it. He becomes lethargic in his relationship with God. He's not bothered to meet with God. So let's think about that again. His fear's out of perspective. His loneliness. It doesn't seem to be fussed about God. His sleep patterns are all over the place. He's worn out. He's become lazy in his self-care, and he's become lazy in his spiritual care too. If Elijah went off to his GP with that list of symptoms, what would the GP say? Yeah, I think the GP would probably diagnose him with depression and anxiety, wouldn't he? Or if he went to occupational health in his work, you know, what would they say? Elijah, I think you're under a bit too much pressure at the moment. I think you need to slow things down. Or you know, if there was an agency for pastoral care of Old Testament prophets in those days, and he went to them, you know, I think that he'd go to them and they would say, Elijah, that's ministerial burnout. You've pushed yourself too hard and it's cracked. You know, Elijah's had all of these successes. It feels like everything's going really well in his life, but suddenly it's just too much and he just can't cope. And that threat that Jezebel makes on his life feels like it's almost the final straw, the final straw that's broken the back. Do you know? It doesn't feel like he should worry him so much, but it's the thing that's gone, this is it. I can't cope with that anymore. And Elijah becomes this broken, burned out, overstretched, overwhelmed character. And so this figure who we met, who seems so resilient, we then find hiding in the desert, cowering in the desert, hiding away in a cave. And his, you know, the everyday stuff is too much for him. He can't cope with, let alone this enormous vocation, this calling that God's given him. Can you relate to Elijah at all? Can you relate to that experience? Some of us can, can't we? You come to the point where everything feels like too much, and maybe all the things that used to make you happy and satisfied don't seem to touch you anymore. You just feel a bit distant from everything. I told you that this story has intrigued me for a long time, but then about 18 months ago, a bit more than 18 months ago, I got sick, and then the story really resonated with me. And what happened was, I stopped sleeping properly. I was, you know, really not sleeping very much at all. This substrate was really odd. I couldn't keep food down. I would eat and then I would just be sick. I felt fevery all the time and short of breath all the time. And so, of course, I talked to my GP. We're in lockdown, so we talk over the phone and over the computer. And he tries a few different things. He treats me for asthma and then a chest infection, which perhaps I had. I don't know. It's difficult to tell now. But still feeling the same symptoms. And eventually he says, I think this is maybe stress. I think this is maybe anxiety. And so for me, I was off work in the end for 2.5 months, and probably about 6 or 7 weeks into that time of being sick, the GP helped find a combination of 2 antidepressants, which finally helped me sleep. And then when I started to sleep a bit better, that I began to think, oh yeah, you know, really, I might get better. You know, I can really see I might be turning a corner now. But, you know, I found I had to cancel everything in my diary. It just, everything felt like too much. Do you know? So even some things that were like 8 weeks in advance and I was prepared for already and really looking forward to, as I was delivering some classes up in Nottingham, I was really looking forward to it. And I found as long as I knew it was in my diary, I just couldn't settle. You know, I had to just cancel all these things. It was just amazing. Not amazing, grim. And my mood was up and down all the time, but often really, really low. And I had very little energy. And I found lots of things really, really overstimulating. When I was first off work, I tried to watch a film with Thomas, one that he picked, probably Marvel. And it just like, it was so much noise and light. I couldn't really cope with it. I ended up watching farming programs instead. Lots of greenery and reading novels. I had to lay down heavy theological books, although I was enjoying them. I just realized it was making my head go. And I remember, you know, going into the little Tesco's to get milk and thinking, I don't know if I can, I might find this too much. Do you know? Just incredible, really. It feels incredible to talk about it now. And for me, in hindsight, you know, it does seem like what triggered it was overwork. You know, we hit, well, it may have been coming anyway, I don't know, but we hit lockdown. I found that really stimulating, having to rethink how we do everything, but it did take a lot of effort. And maybe overwork, or maybe just I wasn't really switching off. Do you ever do this? I had days off, but my head was still going round the whole time, you know, with what we were doing in church or what I was preaching next, or I was writing an MA at the same time, what I was writing, what I was reading, processing all that stuff. And just not switching off enough, I think finally caught up with me. I think that's what happened. But of course, our brains and our bodies are absolutely amazing, aren't they? And also really complicated. So who knows for sure what really happens to us? And you may find you've come into a period of depression, or you might come into a period of depression without really ever knowing quite why. So that might be what happened to me. I don't know. So I came back to work. I did limited hours for a while. I was really wobbly back to work for about 6 weeks. And then I hit sabbatical that was in the diary already. Having come back from sabbatical, I think I feel really well. And I found it really helpful to talk to people who've been through similar things. And there's a lot of people, a lot of you. That's really, really helpful. Hopefully you might find me talking about it helpful. I don't really like talking about myself on Sunday mornings. Actually, I don't really like talking about myself. Anyway, I'm saying it because hopefully some of you might find it helpful. But also I found this passage about Elijah really, really helpful. Somebody said to me, read the story of Elijah. And I found this chapter especially helpful. And I read it and it felt like it gave me permission to rest and permission just to eat, and just to drink and just to take time out, not having to produce anything or having to fulfill any commitments or anything like that. And when I see Elijah being cared for by God in this way and all the pressure taken off, that's okay. I can do that too. Let's just think about what what God does do for Elijah. First of all, God finds Elijah. His prophet flees away from everything, from his life, from God, from everything. But God goes and finds him. And God provides for his needs. So Elijah's not bothered about what he's eating or drinking. He's given up on life, but God comes and provides for him food and water. For me, it was those things, but it was also exercise and medicine. God provides the things that you need to recover. And also, did you notice God blaming Elijah? No, not at all. Did you? God doesn't blame Elijah. He doesn't say to him, you should be doing better than this. And Elijah might be saying that to himself. You might be saying that to yourself if you struggle with something like this. But actually, God doesn't say you need to be doing better, or I thought you were more resilient, or I'm a bit let down. Do you know? All these things we might say about ourselves, but God doesn't. He doesn't blame him at all. And then I'm really interested that God meets with Elijah, but in a different way. Okay, so we're used to God pitches up and there's wind and rocks and fire and all that stuff. But actually, Elijah doesn't meet God in any of that. And then suddenly God comes in a different way, in a still small voice. And he does meet with God then. And I think when we're experiencing times of anxiety and depression or low mood, whatever else you want to call it, it can be really difficult to find God in the normal ways we find God. Yeah. And you just need to take the pressure off yourself. I'm trying to pray, but it feels really difficult. That's okay. Don't worry. It's fine. Doesn't mean God's left you. Just that's the way it's working. Do you know? And it might be like Elijah. You find God meets you in a different way in that time. But also there's another thing. Sometimes we just need to trust that I'm struggling to pray, or I'm struggling to connect with God in any way, but I know that the church is there praying for me and they're meeting with God on my behalf, and that's enough. Do you know? And the same with worship. I'm struggling to sing the songs, but I know that the congregation are worshiping, and I know that that's enough for me for now. That's what I need for now. They're doing it on my behalf. They're doing it for me. So God meets with Elijah in different ways. And then God goes and tells him some things to do. A lovely little thing about the way as well. Early on, God says something like, the journey is too hard for you, but the word is way. The way is too hard for you. But then after some time, after Elijah's been fed in the wilderness, after Elijah's hidden in the cave, after Elijah's encountered God in this still small way, then God says, now go back the way you came from. That same word again, go back And he gives him these small things to do. So God comes to Elijah who's struggling. God gives him some small things to do. And you know, if you're in a time of depression, maybe small things to do is the best thing, you know. And for me, it was going out for a walk, even though I didn't feel like it, that sort of thing. Actually, also for me, it was not seeing too many people. In theory, you think you need to see people, but I suppose because my job is seeing people, I actually needed to not give out too much energy to people and just take it easy instead. The things that Elijah is given to do are really practical. Go and anoint this person and that person. And actually, it's God giving him people around him, reminding him, not just the 17,000, but here are some particular people who are going to help carry the vocation that you've been given. And in all of these things, God is using Elijah's exhaustion, his sickness, his depression, actually to bring him back to God. Yeah. So Elijah gets sick and he flees, but God uses that whole experience to bring him back. Does that make sense? I've thrown at you lots of different things that God is doing there. I hope that's okay. It might be helpful for you today. It might be this isn't terribly helpful at the moment. It might be helpful one day. It might be helpful for you to know what somebody else near you's been experiencing. But you know, if you don't take anything else from today, just the fact that Elijah, this great big character, experienced moments of real darkness. And Elijah, this resilient prophet, really needed help. And isn't it a good reminder that it's not wrong to experience moments of darkness? It's not wrong to need help. If you are unwell, if you have been, remember, God is one who will come to find you. God won't rebuke you for what's gone wrong in you. God cares about your most basic needs, even when you don't. Maybe God is trying to encounter you in a different way. And God will help you see little things that you should do, which might help. Finally, God is bringing people around you who can help carry the burden, who can walk with you. Is that okay? I want to read to you a poem which Leslie's sister, twin sister, Isabel, has written from this passage. So I'm going to read you the poem, and then we're going to be quiet for a little while, invite the Holy Spirit to meet with us. And then in time, we're going to sing again, and the children and the youth are going to join us, and we're going to take communion together. So this poem is called Wilderness Walking. I walked a time in the wilderness and rested 'neath a tree. It's too much, Lord, I prayed. Take my life away from me. A welcomed sleep engulfed me, yet I woke to find the bread and the water that his angels had left beside my head. Preparing reluctant traveler for a journey that I'd not crave, to Sinai he led me, to take refuge in a cave. But there's a mountain here inside of me, and I long to hide away in a cave of my own making. I cannot face the day. The Lord passed by and sent the wind, which hurled the rocks around. An earthquake followed, splitting earth, division in the ground. A fire too consumed the scene, but none was yet his choice. When all was still within me, I heard the soft whisper of his voice. Covering my face, I stepped outside, my heart and faith quite shaken. I'm the only one left who serves you, Lord. Oh, how I was mistaken. 7,000 faithful in the land, reserved for grace and favor. 7,001, my heart replied. My God will be my Saviour. And so, Lord, we pray that your Holy Spirit come. Not that you're not already here, but we just consciously ask you to come and fall upon us. Come and meet with us. Come and fill us with your life and your presence. And for any of us who feel in the darkness at the moment, in the place of despair, Spirit of God, come and reassure us that though we feel distant from God, God is seeking us and caring for us and putting people around us we need. And Lord, we open ourselves up to the still small voice, to the things you might want to say to us here and now. And for some of us, that might be somebody we need to reach out to help. Somebody who we could walk more closely with through their own sense of being overwhelmed. Whatever else you might want to say to us, we open ourselves to you, to your calling, to the things you're asking of us.